Hello and welcome to the RG10 Podcast. Now, here's a question for you. What does a single working parent and an international class duathlete have in common? The answer? Well, it's the ability to multitask and a lot of energy. Despite that, it would be entirely reasonable to assume that it's impossible to fulfil both roles at the same time, but that is not the case in Twyford. Tamina Oliver has been selected to represent Great Britain in this year's Duathlon European and World Championships, all whilst fitting in her training around her work and young son. As you're about to find out, Tamina's journey has been far from straightforward, full of surprises and moments of disappointment and frustration. I started off by asking her about her sporting background, and the answer wasn't quite what I expected.
Well, I've always been very active. When I was at university and school, I was always in sort of netball, hockey, football, everything teams, and then was also very involved in dance. So I did a lot of dance, and at university ended up doing a lot of dance, and lived in Cuba for a year and danced every day there. So and then did some dancing in a kind of professional capacity in the States after I finished university, which was great fun. But
what kind of dancing are we talking here? Sorry, I didn't expect the interview to take this tangent already, but this is fascinating.
Well, it was originally sort of contemporary, and then I loved Cuban, Afro-Cuban stuff and salsa, basically.
We've wandered into Cuban dancing, and from there. Okay, how did you make the jump into? It was cycling first, wasn't it? So you're a Cuban dancer, and then you're into cycling. Tell me about that journey.
Well, I suppose when I came back from the States, I didn't do any competitive sport for a while, but I'd been brought up on the back of my mum's bike. We didn't have a car when I was a kid, so I was always in a bike seat, but then had a little bike. My first bike was from the local tip, and it was this little purple thing that I used to. Apparently, my legs looked a bit like pistons going around, and so I'd always cycled from the age of 3, just to kind of get around as a form of transport, and hadn't really. Well, I'd never contemplated cycling as a sport. I just used it as transport. And I got a job with this sort of charitable arm of an organisation, which is the National Cyclists Organisation. And I was the sort of development officer, and the idea was to try and facilitate cycling for people who don't normally get the opportunity to cycle, so minority groups, disabled groups, and etc. Anyhow, the fact that it was a cycling-based organisation obviously had lots and lots of different cyclists as staff members, and including quite a number of racing cyclists or people who raced as part of it was their hobby. So I was lent. I had a knackered old bike that was 40 years old and had been given to me for free. Didn't have any kind of gears. Well, I just had the one gear. Didn't have multiple gears, and so I'd never really known what it was like to cycle on road bike. But one of my colleagues at the cycling organisation lent me his spare bike, which was a road bike, and I suddenly discovered that actually I was quite fast, and I thought, wow, this is good, and then I was sort of spotted, I suppose, by someone who just happened to be a coach, a cycling coach, and lived in Reading, where I was also living, and he kind of spotted me sort of catching up with various different cyclists while I was on my hybrid bike, and said, "Do you want to come and have a go at kind of cycling?" And so, or to the track velodrome in Reading. I entered my first road race, and I won it. So I had no idea what I was doing, really not a clue, but kind of I didn't even realize where the finish line was, to be fair. and but I really enjoyed it. And then I did some more races at sort of national level and was picked up by a team, and then it progressed quite quickly. And then I ended up sort of a couple of years later sort of going into international racing and racing with teams internationally.
Okay, so you're a top class cyclist, but obviously to get on to the duathlon side of things, you need to be a pretty good runner as well. What happened to lead to that? When did you find? Were you always a good runner? Is this something else that you kind of stumbled across as well?
I really did stumble upon that, really, I suppose, because it was after my son was born, and he was born in 2017, and it was tricky for me to kind of get out, well, do cycling much with him around, and then as a single parent, during COVID, I started pushing him in a buggy because I couldn't really do much cycling. So so I started running with him in a buggy, and then when kind of lockdowns opened up and we were allowed to do park runs, I started doing park runs with him in the buggy. And we still do it. He's now 7, and he's still now kind of like I'm pushing about 45 kilograms, including him and this buggy. This is quite fun. But so I started doing that, and then my ex-coach, cycling coach, had sort of I didn't realize that because I'd got this sort of watch that he record runs on, which is like he could pick it up on the app that we'd previously used for my training. And I didn't know this, but he says it's called Training Peaks, and he could see what I was doing, and seeing that I wasn't too bad at them, he suggested or said, how about giving duathlons a go? So so that year, which was the beginning of 2022, he started sort of coaching me with both a training schedule for cycling and running. And then I entered my first duathlon in April of that year, April 2022, and I was first lady, which was great. I mean that, and then I entered sort of another 7 during that season, and won in my category every time, which meant that by the end of the season, I'd been selected to represent GB in the European and the World Championships.
Everything's going wonderfully well, and then what happened?
I was just out training. Nothing sort of innocuous happened, and had a freak injury. I completely ruptured one of the main tendons in my left foot, which is apparently a very unusual sort of injury to acquire unless you drop something sharp on your foot that kind of severs it. But to have it happen just through running is apparently very, very unusual. Anyway, so I was unlucky, and I had to have major surgery. It was a little bit galling because actually, based on the performances of the other people, I probably would have made it onto the podium as a sort of in third position, second or third, not first. The first one was phenomenal, but yes, so that was pretty difficult to see. And then I had a long period of kind of rehabilitation and recuperation. I entered a couple of qualifying races then, and qualified, didn't win, but I qualified for the 2024 World Championships and European Championships. So was starting to pick up training and stuff, but presumably because of the injury, I mean, medics think that it's probably compensatory injuries that I had issues with my right hip and back and all this sort of thing. And that is, they think it was that because of the original tendon rupture in my left foot, I'd sort of changed my gait a little bit, and muscles had changed a bit. And so I was struggling to train enough to get to a standard that I would have been happy with. And And so I chose to withdraw because I couldn't, well, I didn't want to go and just sort of participate and not do okay. And so but I did manage to qualify for this year, not comfortably, I hasten to say. It was a little bit hidden. Well, only just. I managed to qualify, which is great, but it was not an easy race.
How much of your week or of a day does the training take up? Give us an idea of what a typical week might look like.
Well, I work full time and I'm a single mum, so I have a 7-year-old. So it's not as much as it might be ideally, but I get up very early in the morning and usually do.
You say early, what are we talking here?
Well, about 5:30.
Okay. Yeah.
And do my training usually before my little one goes to school. So this morning, for example, it was an hour and a half on the stationary bike. And so it usually is about an hour and a half on the bike or about an hour to an hour and a half of running.
Tell me a bit about the main areas of cost that I guess that you need help with while you're trying to raise money.
So I need to pay, say, entry fee for the race, which is £250 plus international race license, which is another 50 quid almost, and then compulsory gear outfit, which is £200. So that's sort of 500 quid without even having got airfare or accommodation or any equipment. So I mean, I've got my old racing bike, which is what I will use if I can't get enough money, but it's 13 years old. So it's well below kind of standards that nowadays people would be really racing on at this level. So I do prefer to have sort of to not be someone with all the gear and no idea, but I mean, that's not my style, but I'd like to have an idea and the gear.
That was Tamina Oliver, and you can find out how to sponsor her by checking out the episode notes. Thanks for listening to the RG10 podcast. Do take a moment to subscribe or follow the show, and if you're feeling particularly generous, why not leave us a glowing review? Goodbye.